Hi guys, Josh at AK Beards and Books. Today I am doing the wrap up for my Stephen King reading challenge. Hope you enjoy. So guys, if you didn't know, one of the first challenges I set myself when I joined up on booktube was reading more Stephen King. He's an author I wanted to read more of for quite a while, but I've never really known where to begin with him. He's done so many books and they're of such varied, horror / thriller fantasy style. I didn't know where to begin, so I just thought, why not? I'll chuck myself a challenge. I'll have a month where I read nothing but Stephen King, and this is the result. So in terms of books that I read, I finished 4 books, which wasn't as much as I was hoping to get through, but it was still well over 2,000 pages, so it's still quite a good month. I read a collection of short stories from the Bizarre of Bad Dreams. I didn't finish that book. I never really intended to. It was more just for when I'm in between chapters or when one of the books I was reading was a bit slow. And I will talk through all of the books that I read with you now. So first up, last year I read a book called End of Watch, which is the 3rd book in the Bill Hodges Mr. Mercedes trilogy. I didn't realise at the time that it was the final book in the trilogy, so I kind of shot myself in the foot a little bit. Saying that, End of Watch was a book that I really enjoyed, so one of the challenges I set for myself was to go back and read the other 2 books, starting with Mr. Mercedes, finishing with Finders Keepers. First up, Mr. Mercedes. Now, let me just say first of all, I thought this book was brilliant. I really enjoyed this book. I think it's a really underrated book from Stephen King, and it shows that his style isn't just a horror. This is definitely more of a thriller. It probably has horror aspects, but the thriller side of it really shone through, and it's definitely more of a psychological thriller, sorry. So let me just say first of all, I loved Mr. Mercedes. I think this is a really underrated book by Stephen King and a really underrated series. The character of Bill Hodges especially, who is the main character, I found absolutely brilliant. So as mentioned, we follow Bill Hodges, who is the main character. He is a retired detective who retired with a really well-established career, minus one that got away, which is the Mercedes killer. Bill's life is kind of going down the drain slightly. He's retired. He doesn't really know what to do with himself since retiring, and he's kind of contemplating suicide. He's thinking, is life worth carrying on, when he gets a letter from the Mercedes killer. Now, I won't go too much more into the detail and the plot of the story from there, because I don't know about you, I won't want to spoil it all for you. All I'll say is this one is really enjoyable. This is definitely a good place to start if you are like me and you haven't read much Stephen King, because it shows the quality of his writing without being too dark and too in your face. This book, like most Stephen King books, has triggers for everything, homophobic abuse, physical abuse. Obviously there are people that are killed, there's sexual abuse, there's incest, there's pretty much anything you can think of. The same as a lot of Stephen King books is in here, but that's because they're not PG. They are meant to be adult books, adult thrillers and horrors. So it's one I'd really recommend, but just go in there, don't expect a Disney story. Mr. Mercedes, I would give a solid 8 out of 10. I did debate giving it a higher score because the main character of Bill Hodges I absolutely loved. The antagonist of Bradley Harsfield is one that I really enjoyed as well. I haven't seen the TV series of Mr. Mercedes yet, but I'm really looking forward to watching it. Next up, and one that I'm not going to lie, I didn't enjoy that much, was Finders Keepers, which is book 2 in the Bill Hodges series. Now, I said I didn't enjoy it that much. I'm comparing it to book 1 and book 3. I really enjoyed book 1, really enjoyed book 3. This one was just a bit flat for me. My main problem with Finders Keepers is, firstly, you don't see the main character of Bill Hodges for over 100 pages, which just doesn't work for me. I understood the reasoning of their building up the antagonist, who is different in this book to Mr. Mercedes, and the side characters that are coming in, they're giving them a lot of page time. I understand that. But I wanted to read this to carry on the story of Bill Hodges, so waiting a third of the book to really get to him, it wasn't something I enjoyed doing, is the honest answer. The antagonist, so the bad guy, wasn't as interesting for me as Mr. Mercedes. This felt quite similar to Misery, which isn't one I've read yet, but I do understand the storyline. So in the storyline for Finders Keepers, we follow a kind of career criminal who robs an author's house, kills the author. This isn't a spoiler because this is all really early on in the book. Kills the author, and he takes a lot of books that he's written and kind of locked away. The author doesn't want to publish any of his stories anymore, but he has carried on writing them. The thief takes them away, becomes really obsessed with the author and with the story, and then it kind of goes from there. I won't give away too much again because it just ends up being spoilers, but This was okay. It's definitely worth reading to get to end of watch to kind of finish the series, but it's not one I would highly recommend. I'd give it a 6 out of 10. It does pick up when you get to the parts of the story where Bill Hodges and other characters from Miss Mercedes come in, but just the fact that it takes over half of the book for that to really happen didn't really agree with me. Next up, The Bizarre Bad Dreams. So as I mentioned, I didn't finish this book. I never really intended to. I read a bunch of the short stories just in between books. The favourite one for me was actually the first one, which I think was called Mile 51. It was called Mile 81. So I'm not really big on short stories, as the honest answer, guys. I find it hard to get invested in a short space of time, which is probably why Mile 81 was the one I enjoyed the most, as it's one of the longest in the collection of short stories. Is this a book I would recommend if you're a die-hard Stephen King fan? Yes, I definitely would. If you're not much of a Stephen King fan, you're relatively new, I wouldn't hurry to pick it up. Stephen King's done so many good books, this isn't one I'd recommend you jump straight into. I'd say pick up one of the others first. I'm not going to give this one a rating, as I didn't finish it. It wouldn't be fair to rate the collection of short stories. So, next up, and one that really surprised me, is Dolores Claiborne. I ordered this really pretty hardback edition online, and I have to say, this is now one of my favourite Stephen King books in general. This was absolutely brilliant. So we follow Dolores Claiborne, who is accused of murdering the woman that she looks after. She's a housekeeper. She's been the housekeeper for this family for, I think it's 30, 40 years. When the owner of the house dies, and Dolores is there at the time, so she's accused of the murder. So we follow Dolores through her police interview, where she explains her history both before this murder and during they say it's a murder. We don't know at the start whether it actually is or not, but through the death of the homeowner. One of the things I really enjoyed about Dolores Claiborne is the way the story's told. So during the police interview stages, we don't actually see or hear what the police officers ask. We only see Dolores' answer. So it makes you use your imagination to an extent to sort of try and guess and work out what was asked. And then we go to flashbacks where Dolores properly explains the situation and what's happened. For me, this is a really underrated Stephen King book. This is definitely one I'd recommend if you're new to Stephen King or you want to try Stephen King and get into it more. It's not as dark and as horror based as some of his other series. This is definitely one which shows off the evil in people, in humans essentially, which is an undertone in all Stephen King books, even the more, fantasy-y based ones like It. People is still the horror. This book shows that off brilliantly. It's really well written. It's one I really, really enjoyed. And if you can find this edition, definitely do, because some of the pages are actually illustrated as well, which is really nice. I give this one a 9 out of 10. This is such a good book. Definitely one I'll revisit in a year or two's time, and I'd highly recommend it. Finally, It. Now, this book took me longer than anticipated, I won't lie. So this book is 911 pages, at least this hardback edition of it is. The writing's quite small, so I don't know if that affected the page count. Right, what I'm going to do, if you haven't read this book yet, I'm going to put it on the back because I'm going to have to talk spoilers for it. So if you want to read it, wait till I've taken the book back down. Firstly, what a book. I thought that to me, it is an absolute masterpiece in horror writing. From page 1, the tone is set in just how dark and expansive the book is going to be, but you don't really fully get the grasp of it until hundreds of pages in. It's just such a good book for me. So firstly, something I've touched on a couple of times, I loved The Losers Club. I know for a lot of people, the scene towards the end where they're in the tunnels and they're going out and they all have sex. What the fuck was that about, right? I didn't get that scene. I didn't understand it. It didn't affect the way I felt about The Losers Club, because to me, it was so out of context versus the way they had acted with each other through the rest of the book that I pretty much chose to ignore it. I don't know why that was in there. I don't get it. It kind of ruined the ending for me to an extent, is the honest answer. But overall, I'm choosing to ignore it. I loved the book. I thought it's brilliant. I love The Losers Club. That end scene didn't change anything for me, as weird as it was. So why did I love it? We all know the story of it. We all know the story of Pennywise and, how he likes to just kill everything, basically. Why I loved it was, 1, The Losers Club 2, learning more about Pennywise and the history of Pennywise. So from where I hadn't read the book before, I'd only ever watched the original TV movie and the newer film that had come out. I had a certain understanding of Pennywise, but nothing compared to what you go into in the book. I always knew that Pennywise wasn't the creature's sort of default look, but hearing about that more, explaining that more, hearing about how he came from space, or, you know, kind of suggested space, was really, really interesting and really brilliant. Also, I would also use that as a negative as well. I also didn't like the fact, probably down to the films, the lack of Pennywise. And I don't mean in terms of Pennywise as the evil character overall. I mean, obviously Pennywise takes so many different forms. But for me, the final battle at the end, where the creature was a spider, I didn't really get, because spiders hadn't been touched on much through the story, through the book. At least not that I remembered. I would have preferred that final fight to have been the Losers Club against Pennywise, both when they're adults and when they're children. I think it would have come full circle better. But that's probably just a personal, personal preference. I don't really know what to say about this, but I genuinely really enjoyed it. It was by far my favourite Stephen King book. It's one that I think I will struggle to find a Stephen King book that I prefer. I'm going to carry on reading a lot of Stephen King. And you see the Stephen King shelf is building quite nicely. I just thought it was an absolute masterpiece. I give it a solid 9 out of 10. I can't give it a 10 out of 10, purely because, as I said, I would have liked to have seen more Pennywise as Pennywise. That is just personal preference, but I would have preferred it. And 2, the scene with the Losers Club when they were still young teenagers and they all have sex, it didn't make sense to me. I don't think it added anything to the story. I understand the hints of coming of age and keeping them together, but I think there are different and better ways that it could have been done. I'd have understood if Beverly had gone off with Bill once they got out, or even Ben, but it just didn't make sense to me. It kind of did ruin the ending. I'm choosing to ignore it so that I don't, it doesn't affect my view of the book overall, but it definitely affected it. So guys, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. I've tried not to go too much in detail for any of these books, because I like to try and keep my reviews and my wrap-ups spoiler free. If you've got any questions about any of the books, let me know down in the comments. I'll happily answer them. I will 100% be reading more Stephen King from now. I've collected a lot of Stephen King books over the last month or so, fully preparing to read more. I'm not going to in the next month or so, I don't think, because I could do just some YA and just some easy reads after all that death and killing and racism and just... They're heavy books. I need a break, basically. As always, guys, thank you for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe if you have. I will meet you down in the comments, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.